Welcome to the Cycling Performance Podcast, presented by Team EF Coaching, where we explore the intersection between the science of sport and the art of balance, human behavior, and sustainable performance on and off the bike. Welcome back, Internet dwellers. This is the Cycling Performance Podcast. It has been a while since this channel has been active, and we are very excited to be back online. We thought of no one more perfect to join us for our first episode. But first, I'll introduce myself. My name's Nathan Haas. I am a co-director at Team EF Coaching, and our co-presenter,
Colby Pierce.
Who has been a long-time friend and also my coach for most of my career. So it's very fun to be presenting with him. But our main guest today is the one and only Jonathan Vaughters. He needs no introduction, but I will hand it over to JV just to tell us all a little about himself.
My name's Jonathan Vaughters. Everyone calls me JV because my name has quite a few syllables to it. I'm the founder of EF Pro Cycling, although, of course, originally it wasn't called that. Originally it was called Slipstream Sports, and before that, I don't know, it didn't really have a name, but it's the longest running professional cycling team the United States has ever had, or registered in the United States. One of the longest longest running professional cycling teams in the world now. I think there's only 2 or 3 that are in front of us as far as total age that they've been around. So obviously pretty proud of that, because, you know, keeping a professional cycling team running is kind of like, how does a bumblebee fly? Nobody actually knows how they stay in the air, but somehow we manage to keep it afloat every year. So that's something to be proud of. My history, obviously, I was once a professional cyclist myself a long time ago. And, you know, I'm one of the few remaining general managers in professional cycling that actually raced once themselves. It's definitely turned into more of a business, and not so many of the GMs out there anymore have actually felt what it feels like to break bones and to rip skin off your body on the pavement. So I still think that's an important perspective to have, but you know, anyway, it's just becoming more and more of a rarity. I also have an MBA in business and finance from the University of Denver, which has, I think, probably added to the multi-dynamic fashion of the way this team is run, or at least I can use fancy acronyms that most people don't understand, that make people think I'm smart when I'm actually not. So other than that, yeah, I love physiology. I love sports science. I love the mental process of trying to figure out how to make bike racers go faster. That's actually something I'm passionate about. There's a lot of areas in the sport that I do because I have to, because it's the job. But when it comes down to the art, and I'll call it an art, I mean, I know it is an art and a science, but I still think of it as more of an art, to making bike riders go faster. That's the part that I love.
Well, I suppose for the benefit of our audience, maybe we can frame a little bit of our history as friends and as bike racers together. We grew up racing together in Boulder, Colorado, and had a lot of adventures traipsing around in the Volvo that at one point became our race vehicle, and had a lot of we have a lot of stories to tell, some of which could be told on a podcast and maybe some of them not so much. But I would love it for you to unpack a little more about some of the novel ideas that you've approached, specifically dancing that line between art and science in cycling. Like you said, you prefer to think of it as more of an art. So what's the line there? Like how do we tease out the difference, especially in this culture of science? Like, science is just like a huge umbrella that has descended upon our sport, and everyone loves to count grams of carbs and count grams of drag, and so how do we dance with that?
Well, you know, the best example I can come up with this is, so, as maybe the audience doesn't know this, but Colby and I were quite literally probably about the 7th and 8th purchasers of an SRM power measuring device on the planet Earth. We were extremely early adopters to this device, and I remember both of us basically had to go like steal money from a bank in order to actually purchase the damn thing because they were so expensive back then. But you know, both of us have data somewhere in a hard drive, you know, dating all the way back to 1994, late 1994. So that gives some very interesting insights, and of course, neither one of us having a degree in sports science or biology or medicine, you kind of just are interpreting the data as, well, that worked, and oh, okay, that didn't work, and you know, and that's about it. So the best example I have of an art that I found worked, and then I incorporated it into coaching riders, and it continued to work. And I have no idea why. And neither any sports scientist I tell about it sort of goes, oh, well, it could be this or it could be that. And well, it's really surprising that actually works. I don't understand. But I know it works because, you know, multiple podium finishes in monuments have been achieved doing this, with Dylan van Baarle, with Sebastian Langeveld, amongst others. You know, is this very odd concept of 2 days before a 270-kilometer event, which normally under any advice you're going to get is you should be resting, tapering. But from what I found in my own SRM data, as I said, it seems as if when the taper is too strong, that actually, you know, all of your power values, and especially your aerobic power values, you know, your sort of plus 20-minute values and ability to recover from heavy 20-minute loads and then do it again and again and again, repeatability, really suffer when you over taper. And so there's various ways of fixing that, but with both Sebastian and Dylan, when they podiumed in Roubaix and Flanders respectively, I had them ride a full 6 hours 2 days before the race. And most people are like, that's insane. You're just fatiguing your athletes. Now, admit they were, you know, not riding very quickly, but like they were out there for 6 hours. You know, my theory goes that it has something to do with plasma volume and keeping plasma volume up, and additionally just basically sort of depleting glycogen and then completely repleting. Like if you did a hard 6 hour ride, that's a different thing than doing an easy 6 hour ride. You know, basically just sort of like softly drains the system without doing any muscle damage. And then you have, you know, 36 hours to replenish the system before the race. And it was just immensely successful, and you could see it in the power data. And when we would do a traditional taper, you could see that it didn't work. Now, I'm not saying this works for Tour de France, which is 3 weeks long, that you should be riding 6 hours 2 days before the Tour de France. But for a one-day race, it's immensely successful. That, to me, is an example of art, because like there is no science that supports that. None. I mean, someday there may be, or even a better example of like Rigoberto Urán when he was second place in the Tour de France. Like, you know, people say like, oh, you know, he changed his diet, this, that, and the other thing. The only thing Rigo ate during the Tour de France in 2017 was bananas. I mean, you know, and again, like that might not work so well now that we have like better products to be able to refuel carbohydrates. But he, you know, it was like he just ate like 14 bananas in every stage. Yeah. You know, why does that work? I don't know. You know,
well, I mean, apparently in the world of baseball, monkeys never cramp, right?
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, those are two examples of just that you know, training. Although we are becoming more and more knowledgeable and things are moving quicker and quicker, like ultimately there is just an art to understanding when an athlete is fatigued and when they're not. And I know that, you know, that as we're moving into the age of artificial intelligence, that maybe some of that art is taken away as you know, brains greater than our own are going to be able to figure out, you know, what exactly the mechanism is that caused that. But to me, that's still in the category of art.
You know, another thing that I remember you always talking about, which should also be an art, which definitely contradicts anything that makes sense on an emotional or even just a physiological level, is rest days during the Tour de France. Is you've always been someone that's advocated for like 2.5, 3 hours with efforts. And
Yeah,
I remember you saying that you believe that Van der Velde possibly could have won the Tour de France
absolutely.
if it wasn't for taking basically a day off the bike or even just an easy ride.
Yep. No, I mean, I 100% believe that. In the 2008 Tour de France, I think Christian Van der Velde could have won the entire race because he really only had one day that he lost time, and that was the day after the rest day. And actually, he and I got into a pretty rough argument where he basically told me, like, you don't know what you're talking about, old man. And it was on the rest day, and I was like, you need to ride 3 hours on the rest day, because the next day after the rest day went up, I forget the name of the climb, but it went up to the highest altitude of the Tour de France that year, right? And I said, you need to ride 3 hours. If this is a flat stage tomorrow, okay, fine, but tomorrow you need to ride 3 hours. And he's like, I'm not riding 3 hours. He's like, this is the Tour de France, I'm not riding 3 hours on the rest day, this is ridiculous, but on and on and on. And the day after the rest day, his power values were diminished. It was the only day that he just got dropped from the lead group. He ended up finishing fourth or arguably third, depending on how you're going to count, all the anti-doping tests and whatnot. But in the Tour de France in 2008, but that was the only day he lost time. Was that day? I honestly think he could have won the Tour de France. Would be kind of crazy because. But I think it was a real possibility of him winning the Tour de France that year had the rest day ride been longer. Now, even now I don't get a whole lot of buy-in on that. I can tell this story over and over again, but like the guys definitely don't want to ride 3 hours on the rest day in the Tour de France, And the odd part about it is that the more fatigued you are, the better it is to do that longer ride on the rest day in a 3-week race. Like if you're like not fatigued at all, like, okay, maybe your body can bounce through just doing an hour and a half. Richard Carapaz, here's a more recent example. Giro last year. So everyone talks about that second to last stage where he and Del Toro basically, just had like some sort of cockfight, to figure out, who was going to pull and who wasn't. Okay, that's nice, but Richard didn't lose the Giro there. Richard lost the Giro in the first time trial, which was the day after the rest day. And in typical Richard form, like basically Richard rode about 20 minutes and was just like, oh, that's good. And, and he lost massive time in that first time trial. Now, he's not a time trial naturally. To me, that speaks to like, okay, if you're not a time trialist, you'd want to really make sure that you did everything possible to like lose as little time. But yeah, that's where he lost time to, that's why, like, had he not been in that, had he not lost all that time in that time trial, he would have already been in front of Del Toro, and like that, and that little battle on the second to last day would have been irrelevant. So, but that isn't what happened. And I would say that that's thoroughly due to like not riding enough on the rest day. So why is that? Why is it that like you have to put in a pretty big volume of work on the rest day? I think it's the only analogy. Again, nobody knows. The answer is nobody knows. But I think the answer is, but it is provable in that you see the decreased power. I mean, Richard's power was pathetic in that time trial for him. Relative to him, it was pathetic in that time trial relative to what he can normally do. So it's not just like, oh, he's a bad time trialist. No, he was producing less power than he does on like a normal training day on his TT bike. So why is it that that if you don't ride enough volume on the rest day, that your body reacts so negatively? I think it's like the equivalent of like when you like if you I don't know, imagine you have a house and like you say, okay, like we're gonna repair the house. So we're all repairing the house, nobody can live here, and we're shutting it down, and everything's closed while we're repairing it, right? I think that's the way your body treats like an absolute rest day. Like when it's under extreme fatigue, like in a 3-week tour, that like if you just stop and do nothing, like your body's like, great, we absolutely needed that. In fact, we need about 4 or 5 more of these complete rest days. So we're gonna just shut everything down. So like basically you can't move for the next week. And if you do that, the first couple of days after the rest day, you're not going anywhere because your body's literally shut down to try to repair itself, and then all of a sudden you're trying to open it back up. Well, if you have a mountain stage or a time trial immediately after the rest day, the key is to never shut it down to begin with.
Yeah, think of it like the engine being warm, right, in a car. Like you wouldn't rip your Porsche out of the garage if you
Yeah, exactly.
if you cared about it and you knew how engines work, you wouldn't just like take it out of the garage on a cold day and just like floor it straight down the street. You would let it get going, right?
And the interesting thing is like, even though I don't have a scientific explanation for it, I don't know. I mean, it is the art, but man, you can see like what happens when in those, like, you over rested on the rest day and then you come back, is that your first effort you're fine.
Yeah.
But your second and third, like all of a sudden your heart rate just goes through the roof, like super high heart rate, and you're producing no power. And like, and your recovery just gets worse. Like each subsequent effort, your power just gets worse and worse and worse. And like, I mean, like saying it's like shutting a house down for repairs or shutting your body down for repairs. I mean, that's the least scientific explanation I could possibly give, because I don't actually know what is going on there. I mean, it's something to do with blood volume. It's something to do with potentially cortisol levels, potentially, I don't know, downregulation of substrates. I mean, we can postulate on this all day long. The answer is I don't know, but I sure as hell know that, like, laying in bed all day, in the rest day of the Tour de France does not work.
I mean, to me, it's really interesting because I personally experienced both outcomes. When I did have full rest or, just an easy ride, I felt exactly the same. And then Colby actually suggested that I started doing an easy ride with the team in the morning and then a short ergo again in the afternoon with a few efforts. And for me, it felt like a massive pain in the ass, to be honest. But it was almost like I felt like a new human. It was almost like it upregulated recovery as opposed to downregulated. But the question I have for you is, we're talking about art versus science, which is always kind of the debate. And obviously these two things, they couple, right? They're part of the same story. But we also know in cycling there's a lot of wives' tales. I was on Team Cofidis and I got introduced to a whole world of things that were considered art, but I didn't find them to be effective. So what in your mind separates art from wives' tales?
Yeah, I mean, listen, the reason that I actually consider those two things that I just talked about, the 6-hour ride 2 days before, which by the way, like, none of your Cofidis people would do a 6-hour ride 2 days before Milan-San Remo or Paris-Roubaix either. So like, or ride that much on the, ride 3 hours on the rest day, or do an ergo session in the afternoon. I mean, I almost guarantee you on Cofidis, they thought you were out of your mind doing an ergo session in the afternoon, like on the rest day. So,
well, my French mechanics thought I was absolutely bizarro asking them to set up the ergo, and they looked at me like I was just a pain in the ass. But it's what I needed because I knew it worked.
100%. But we can talk about those being art, and they are art in that, like, we don't know why they work, but it is demonstrable from a scientific standpoint that it does work, because simply put, the power outputs are dramatically lower, especially on the second or third consecutive effort, if you don't do that. And the dramatic effort, the power outputs are higher from a very dramatic standpoint if you do that. I mean, what's amazing to me is that, what I found with that 6-hour ride 2 days before, a classic, is that we would see, because we, sort of tested it beforehand in training rides, you work all year long to, like, get your let's say your 20-minute power up 5%. Like 5%, you work 340 days a year to get 5% eked out, right? And what we would find is that when you over tapered, like, you could be perfectly fit, but if you over tapered, you actually lost 10% off of, like, your second effort on a 20-minute effort. So, like, you're basically throwing 340 days of work out the window because, like, you wanted to stay in bed, on the rest day, or you thought it was ridiculous to do a longer ride 2 days before a classic. I mean, that, to me, and the only reason I know that, or I knew that when I went into, like, coaching these guys, was observing my own power values in races. And I was always, like, I remember the year that I won the time trial up the Mont Ventoux in the Dauphiné and almost won the Dauphiné overall. I did Classic des Alpes 2 days before the Dauphiné, and I had done the classic taper in the Classic des Alpes, like, right? And I go into Classic des Alpes, I got murdered. I finished the damn thing, but I think I finished pretty close to last place in Classic des Alpes. I mean, just like blown out of the water. And then we do the prologue of the Dauphiné 2 days later, and it's like I'm great in the prologue, and then 4 days after that is a time trial. Like it was like basically just completely nutting myself in the Classic des Alpes. Like allowed just my power output came way up for the Dauphiné. So that was you just observe that like 4 or 5 different times, and you say, okay, might be something to this.
So to follow that up with a question, then, I'm seeing more and more there's this like phenomena, and I think it's caused by the outliers, which are Tadej and Vingegaard, where they actually don't like racing very much. And they can basically have these long periods of time, and Evenepoel is part of this group as well. They can go away and they have this like perfect preparation, and then they go and have this perfect race. And it's starting to make a lot of athletes in road, but also what I'm seeing in gravel is like absolutely insane how many athletes are actually averse to the concept of racing.
Yeah.
And even a race that's 2 weeks before, say, like the Tracker or Unbound, they go, no. That's just, it's too much uncontrollable load. I need to be able to be absolutely perfect and be able to calculate everything here. And my coach has this progression that we've predicted is going to make me peak at this race. And I kind of giggle because I had so many of the same experiences. Like, even in my first year, I mean, you remember me being at Tour of Colorado. I walked off the team bus after stage one. I think we'd just done Independence Pass. And I walked off the team bus and I was like in a little bit of like, I mean, you could almost say that I was like angry, and I was like, guys, where the F are my shoes, man? Someone's stolen my shoes. And the team doctor goes, dude, they're on your feet. Like, I was in a terrible place, right? And it looked like through the whole of Tour of Colorado, I wasn't in great shape. Turns out I've just never been good at riding at high elevation. But when I came back, I did the Leuven Classic, and I was nothing special at all, like whatsoever. 2 days later, Tour of Britain began, and I kind of won the Tour of Britain. I was second, but Tin and Locke was.
Right.
That whole thing. But for me, like if you had asked me at Leuven Classic, how are you feeling for the Tour of Britain? I would have said, there's no chance I can do well here. In the last period of time. And I had so many times in my career that actually when I thought I was really good and really perfectly prepped for a race, it was underwhelming. And then actually the inverse was more often true. And it was those efforts and those sort of harder efforts that wouldn't have been something that you would have prescribed somebody as a coach for that event if you were targeting, a 6-week ramp up for it. And for me, I think there's a really big disconnect now between how people actually see calculated load and what we get from actually just going and riding our bike sometimes and letting nature take course.
Well, so a couple comments on that. When you're dealing with like Tadej as an example, I mean, probably a lot of his training rides are a higher load than very difficult races, right? So when he like, say he goes to sort of a secondary race like Tour de Provence or something, that's probably not actually challenging him that much, right? And so in a way, like training is going to be more difficult, more challenging, like, and that's the reason he wants to stay away from too many races, is that he knows that actually the stimulus he needs to get to the next level for him is he's not going to find that in a race, because the race isn't going to actually be that hard for him, which I know for most people who've raced on the World Tour, that's sort of insane to even think about it that way. Like, wait, he's like, no, all of those races are very challenging, like every single one. But I don't know, for him, I'm not so sure. I mean, you look at how he won Tour of Romandy. Tour of Romandy, he was clearly like, I mean, he had this massive long classics campaign, did no stage races, was just doing a one-day race like once a week for, 6 weeks or whatever it was. Just like zero stage racing. And then he goes to Tour of Romandy after that. Now, most people, if they do a 6-week block of one race a week, or not even actually one race per week, like one race sort of average per like 10 days, and then you go and do a stage race, you're just, it's not going to work. Like, you're going to be so far off peak. And he was completely, at Tour of Romandy, he was probably like 81% of his capacities. And he actually like barely won, as opposed to just like dominantly won. But but most people, if you did that same program, did that little competition and had to sort of taper down for each one of those, one-day races, you just get killed at Tour of Romandy. But he's a different level, and I think probably trying to emulate what he does or what Vingegaard does. Actually, Vingegaard to me has more of a logical program when you're trying to win the Tour de France. But if you try to emulate what Tadej does, it's not going to work, because basically he's just such a high level physiological phenomenon that I think it's sort of like any sort of training is going to work for him. Like he's just going to grow from a certain amount of load. It doesn't, like I think you could have any number of coaches coach Pogacar and he would be very successful. That does not apply to 99% of World Tour riders. It definitely does not apply to, amateur riders, et cetera, et cetera. Like to me, it's a big challenge with some of our younger riders is because they want to emulate what Tadej is doing. They want to just like train 6 weeks, come into a one-day race and then win the one-day race. And they come into the one-day race and they get killed. And it's like, well, why? Because you haven't been pushed beyond your limits in competition prior to this one event you were peaking for. So instead, you've been doing this perfectly sustainable loading all the way into this one-day event, and then you did very poorly. Why? Because you never got dragged up. You never got pulled by the scruff of your neck up to the next level by guys that are better than you. You were just controlling everything. So you were being the best that you felt you could be. But sometimes to make it to the next level, you kind of have to be ripped up to the next level. It's not fun, but so I just think the whole idea of trying to emulate what the top guys do is not going to work, because for most people, races are considerably more challenging than a training day on the bike. And for those guys, I don't think they are.
I mean, this is the origin for the majority of the peloton. This is effectively the origin of the old wives' tale, to go back to what Nathan was asking about earlier, of racing is the best training. Like for a lot of people, that colloquialism is probably accurate, right? Because what we're saying.
I still very much believe in it. I mean, obviously, but
there are exceptions.
That's for a rider developing. Like they have to do races. You have to learn how to race at some point in time. Like you can't variable. Simulate. Sorry, but you cannot simulate racing in open roads with traffic and stoplights and whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Like you can't. And motor pacing is a great substitute, but it is still a substitute. Obviously you guys know this, but when you look at a power profile of a training ride versus a race, it's immensely different. It's totally different. A race looks like this. It's just the power. It's like full on, coasting, sprinting, right? And motor pacing can look like that a little bit, but a training ride looks like this with like little perfect blocks of effort up and down. And I mean, it just doesn't even it doesn't even appear to be the same sport if you see it on a power graph.
I had a great discussion with a sports scientist the other day, and he was talking about how a writer had come to him and said, "Oh, this guy works with a software company." He said, "Oh, your software is wrong because this guy lived in erg world, right? Which is exactly where you get those blocky training files, which is perfectly controlled. And if you want to be at 221 watts, you're at 221 watts for an hour." And the guy basically went outside and uploaded his first ride ever, obviously a young cyclist and young to the sport. And he was like, "Oh, your software is wrong. Like my power line's really squiggly." And the guy was like, "Yeah, it's because you rode outdoors, man. It's physics." And he was like, "No, your software."
Listen, we have a guy on the team right now, Yardi Vanderlei, who was one of the best, if not the best, like Zwift riders in the world. Like, I mean, the kid was working in a grocery store and he'd do Zwift races at night. We just popped him straight into the World Tour because he did so incredibly well on an ergometer test. And, in retrospect, I'm like, well, of course he did well, because it's like perfect linear power. Just, we did this very long step test where it was like 10-minute stages up and up and up, the old Inigo San Milan test. And he did extraordinarily well. So then we throw him into road racing and like, he's getting there after 3 years. Like he's starting to show signs of like, oh, okay, this guy could be a bike racer. I mean, he crashed in the Giro, but like I think he'll be better by week 3. He's getting there, But like, if you went by his ergometer test and his VO2 max test, this guy should already be like right on Vingegaard's wheel, if not better than Vingegaard's, right? But the thing is like he really did not know how to produce power in a jagged way. Like his body was incredibly good at like basically riding with the tension never letting off for 1 second, you know, like because it's like the tension in an erg test is just like like you never get like 1 second of clearance, right? So he's just, his muscles are under tension the entire time, and he did incredibly well, you know, in testing and in certain race formats, but like he lacks any sort of explosivity because you know the test doesn't emulate explosivity at all. So it's an interesting watching him slowly become a solid world tour rider. I don't know that he's ever going to be one of the best in the world. Maybe he will, but he definitely was mind blowing on an erg test.
Sounds like a good candidate to win the Tour of Malaysia, a race that you always used as an example of like breaks that archetype because it was just wide roads, open, and then there's one giant climb with a huge lead in it, right? Yeah. Kind of the antithesis of most European racing. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But, you know, he's getting there. But it is an interesting example of like, I mean, if you know, he just crushes people on the indoor ergometer, but it is not yet applied to the road.
Yeah.
And I mean, well, and then there's obviously skills. I mean, Jay Vine did the same thing, right? Like Jay Vine was an incredible ergometer rider, and like Matt in the World Tour. I mean, obviously he crashes quite a bit, but that's a different problem.
That's a different problem. I mean, it is, but it's also goes to what we were talking about, the art versus the science, and the emphasis on power and watts and grams of drag, which is all important. It's part of the recipe. But on the other hand, I'm constantly reinforcing with our riders, like, yeah, the engine is huge, but you can't just bank everything into the engine bin. You have to have skills. Like, you could be the strongest guy in the race, but if you crash in the first corner of the descent, like, none of that matters, right? You have to go around corners. You have to learn how to drink while you're in a peloton. You have to know how to find a draft shadow. You've got to have an instinct for when the peloton is like an angry hornet's nest and it's a terrible time to attack versus, I can tell everyone's getting a little bit tired. Now's the time when I can just go bloop off the front and create a gap. Like, those types of art forms are much harder to quantify, and they're hard to impress upon clients. So I think people.
No, I mean, well, I was going to say, like, the most difficult part about this is that we're having a very like insider conversation here. And some people are gonna like listen to this conversation and go, oh, okay, I'm having a little trouble following all this. Like, the difficult part is explaining this, and this is not explaining this just to to EF coaching clients or to amateur riders or what. No, I mean, we have plenty of first and second and even third and fourth year professional riders that still do not completely understand all of these concepts. Like, it's very, and trying to explain it to them, that's an art right there. I mean, I get frustrated. I'm sure they get frustrated with me, just sort of like, whatever, old man, I don't understand what you're saying. But it's a really big challenge to try to explain like how this art, I mean, just because, like, the number of times I've heard, oh, I just produced my all-time greatest 20-minute power. Like, and to me, it's almost like, that's like the kiss of death. Whenever I hear that, I'm like, okay, so you're not going to do very well in your next race is what you're saying. Which it seems insane, but it's, I mean, I feel like it's almost true. To explain to them, okay, that's good, but now we have to be able to apply that to the road. We have to apply that in a race. You have to actually properly taper and then peak yourself for the event. Like, there's, it's nice, but man, that is not the singular factor that produces a great rider. And people don't want to hear that. I mean, they want quantitative feedback. I mean, if you go into the gym and last week you were able to squat 300 pounds and this week you can squat 350 pounds, it's just like quantitatively you're better at weightlifting. And people want that in cycling, and I get it. But
they want certainty. They want certainty, but there's no certainty in life, right? But in bike racing especially, I mean, like, we can talk to Charlie or Andreas Clear or any of the DSs, like, everybody knows this. You go into a race it's like an open whiteboard. It's like, all right, here's the wind, here's the terrain, here's the competition, here's the distance of the race, here are the mountain preems, here's the sprints, here's the Red Bull thing or whatever you've got. Here's how we expect the race to go. Here's how we expect this team to ride. And then you get out there and the first kilometer, all hell breaks loose. And like the wind is the wrong way, people are crashing and flatting, or they're not, or whatever. And it's like, it's a bike race. Like at the end of the day, you have this whiteboard and you've got these concepts and ideas of tactics, but it just goes out the door so often because it's bike racing. It's chaos. It's like a 3-body problem, right?
Which is true, except that what we've been witnessing like the past 3 years, 4 years, the Pogacar thing is just like, Strada Bianchi, he attacks in the exact same place every year. Like it's like within like 5 meters, and then goes away from everyone and then just rides in solo. And it's, you would think like, okay, it's going to be different this year. There's got to be some way to change this, et cetera, et cetera. But
somehow not.
It is so formulaic, and that's an interesting. Part of that is the strength of the UAE team that because their roster is so deep with very, very, very high level riders that they can actually control the pattern enough that it basically just sets it up for Pogacar to do his thing. Like imagine, like I always think racing would be really fit. Like I actually think Pogacar is really interesting. I don't think he's like necessarily good for the sport, but it's super interesting riding. What would be great for the sport is if you had like, an NFL style salary cap system where like Pogacar, he can get his 10 million a year, but like the rest of the roster is all on like minimum. So like, it's like Pogacar is racing for Cofidis. Now we got an interesting race. Like now I'm curious to see who wins this race. Because now you've got like at Strada Bianchi, like that point where he attacks every year. Well, there's already like a 40 rider breakaway by the time that, so he's got to like get his way through like 40 guys before he wins the race because like his team had no ability to control anything for the first 100K. That's an interesting bike race. What we got right now is the strongest rider on the strongest team, so like it becomes a little too formulaic. And what you just described, to me, that's classic bike racing. That's what you want. You want a sport that is unpredictable, that like you don't know who's going to win until the last minute. Like that's exciting for fans. And that's the way the women's races are actually that way now. But men's races, it's a little too formulaic, and hopefully, bike racing goes in eras, right? There's this era and that, and after you get like a block where one rider just sort of dominates everything, usually, for the next 3 or 4 years, it's kind of a little chaotic and crazy.
Yeah.
I see bike racing as like, shuffling a deck of cards. It's statistically, it's safe to say that no deck of cards has ever been shuffled with the same order. And that's with 52 variables. A bike race has, 200 just variables in riders, let alone all the variables of everybody has 2 wheels. So, that's how many tires can get a puncture, how many mechanical,
hold on.
how many crashes.
So you think that in shuffling a deck of cards, it's like there has never been a time where like a shuffle and a shuffle has been the same ever?
No, it's been proven statistically, mathematically, that I believe it's 10 to the power of 27.
Really? No, I just didn't know that. I was like, wow, I didn't know that. Huh.
Yeah, I've read this before. No deck of cards has ever come out with the same
exact order,
with the same outcome. But
so
the difference
like
is,
if you're
a magician,
that means the infinite monkey theorem was wrong. Damn it! Like,
damn it! You've been living wrong. Monkeys do cramp.
Yeah, exactly.
But it all changes when somebody can rig the deck, right? And know where different cards are. And this is how I've always felt when you're riding against these like super teams. I remember this one conversation with Elio Viviani when I was on Cofidis. We sat around a table at the Giro, and our team director was like super angry, and he kept just saying, "Why, guys, can you not ride more like quick step? Like, why can't you do lead outs more like quick step?" And I remember sitting at the table, and I was like, sort of counting, and I was like, "Look, I know what Elio is getting paid. It's a lot, but very quickly, it's just like bam." And I was like, "Right, the total value of all the riders except for Elio Viviani on this table is less than $2 million, in terms of rider value." And I was looking at Ineos at the table, and I was like, I think there might be, 4 riders supporting their GC leader that are paid more than the combined total of all of the support riders on Cofidis.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden, you're racing against a very rigged deck of cards. And, I've always supported the concept of a salary cap, or even a way to kind of do a points cap, or whatever it can be on a team.
Right.
And, there's various challenges to that, obviously, which you know more about than anybody else. But to bring this back to one of the questions I actually had for you is, I've always loved something about Slipstream, which is it kind of was the Moneyball team. And I mean, an anecdote that I always tell people is, on my first year on the team, we did the training camp in 2011 in Boulder, and you actually took the whole team to go see the movie Moneyball with Brad Pitt.
Yeah.
And
I remember that.
For me, I understood the metaphor and analogy really nicely, and I actually thought, wow, maybe JV actually does see me as somebody who's more of a diamond in the rough to shine. And I thought, that's where you want to be as an athlete. You
Right.
want to be in the inverse. But then I remember Van Sumeren walking out and he goes, does JV think that he can pay me less money because he's Mr. Moneyball?
Yeah. No, I actually sat next to Van Sumeren during that movie, and he was, I don't know, he was like, he didn't get it at all whatsoever. There's like 2 things he got out of that movie. Was like, one is that baseball players get paid a lot. That was and 2 is like that he thought that, like, I don't know, whatever, somehow I was trying to screw him over. So but
I remember him saying, does he really think that no other team would want me? What, is he crazy? I won Roubaix. And I was like, yeah, but you won Roubaix because you were on this team.
yeah,
It's kind of a
exactly.
part
And
of it.
I mean,
It is
and
like-
going back, I mean, I remember that day that it was like, what other team in the world would tell the world champion they weren't allowed to pull? You know what I
Right.
mean? Like, I was just like, oh God, like no other team would have done that. So there you go. But anyway, he actually
Right,
knows
so-
that now. It just took him like 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, a movie can hit you like later on where you're like, oh, right.
Yeah.
But in saying that, there were also a lot of races that the team won. Definitely in my generation of being in the team, that maybe on paper the riders didn't deserve. If we were just to look at like raw ability, because there was a lot of things that the team was looking at,
Right.
especially in sports science and also the practice of the art. So we'll talk about the sports science first. We had Robbie Ketchell as one of the head scientists on the team.
Yep.
And we were trying some pretty novel and some pretty crazy aerodynamic concepts well and truly before other teams were. Do you remember the mittens over the TT handlebar, over the TT long sleeve, and the POC helmet was the most radical thing of its time. And then all of a sudden, Olympic teams were trying to find the last ones on Earth to take to the Olympics, to the track.
And the bat suit. I don't know if you remember the bat. The bat suit didn't last very long.
Suit was,
It was
the bat suit
like
was
the
that
huge
shit crazy, but it was awesome.
It was like we're having to tell him, like, keep your arms down as long as you can, it's like, so that nobody sees this.
Yeah, just be cool, man.
Yeah,
Get away with it.
Walk like a
Be
penguin.
cool. It's better to ask for forgiveness than for permission.
Yes.
I mean, I still remember David Miller rocking up to the TT start, and like he puts his arm in. It's just like, I mean, literally, it's Batman. It's like, I am Batman. It was anyway. But
also it goes to like the carb revolution. Like, sometimes I feel like I'm the only person in the room that's like, we've been doing this for a long time. Like, what are you talking about? Like, you need to eat more on the bike. It was like, as soon as I was on the team, that was one of the first things. We had like, a food protocol about how much you needed to eat per hour.
Right.
And then as soon as you got on the bus, it was like, this was your carbohydrate-rich meal that you need to have immediately afterwards. We knew about the glycemic index. Then we had different protein recovery stuff. And we also had amazing chefs that were always, serving us real food as opposed to anything kind of processed. And also measuring out weights of food. This was back in 2012. Like, tell me this isn't new. So when I started going to different teams and I was like eating a lot, I remember being on Katusha and, the head doctor coming up to me and he's like, Nathan, why are you eating so much pasta before a stage? Like, are you insane? And I'm like, well, no, I'm not insane. It's what I need to fuel my body for tomorrow. And he's like, yeah, but you'll be blocked. That's how this works.
Right.
And it's like, now it's hilarious because like, carbs. It's all everyone's talking about. So the team's always been very forward thinking in terms of the science. And then there was the art. The coolest thing that I remember being part of was like team time trial victories, because we were just the boss at it. The team actually went and did team time trial specific training and camps for this stuff before anyone else was doing it. And, you know, Ineos, I think, gets a lot of, you know, credit for this, like, you know, looking for the 1%ers. It's like, I didn't feel like they were actually the first to do that. I think they were the first to communicate it.
Well,
I think,
it was,
give away some of the sweet spots.
we always tried to keep our communication low on all that stuff because we didn't want everyone else figuring it out. You know, the other part about it bluntly is just, you know, that basically Team Sky and predecessor to Ineos, you know, they knew that this stuff worked, but they also had the resources to execute it on an industrial level, you know. So like we were doing it very like bespoke and just, you know, and relying a lot on having intelligent riders that would actually understand and buy into what we were saying, and then executing it. You know, they were actually, you know, they and are still executing it on just sort of an industrial, very financed level, right? You know, Visma is the same sort of thing. So it's a different, you know, which is why a lot of these teams have caught up to us. And so, like now, looking at innovation, I mean, you've got, you know, the UCI that's basically anti-innovation, and then, you know, so and then you've got, you know, teams that are able to, by extremely large budgets, able to just sort of like execute on this stuff at industrial levels. But it's you know, the level of knowledge in the peloton is so much higher than it used to be as a result of that. I mean, basically, like if you functioned like a team like Katusha, now, I mean, you wouldn't stay on the World Tour. You'd get relegated like very quickly. Like I mean, you just wouldn't. You would score 0 points and you'd just be out the back. So
Yeah.
it's interesting how, you know, I mean, I long for the days where there was more lore and myth in cycling because we were so far ahead of everyone on all that stuff. I mean, you know, it's like we won the Giro on like basically we didn't have the best rider in the Giro. We were smarter than everyone else. We won the team time trial. We had best aerodynamics, whatever. Like we gained our seconds here and there. You know, like, and that's not diminishing Ryder Hesjedal at all, because it's just saying from pure strength, like that he wasn't. But the fact of the matter is that we figured out how to get the best out of him, which was incredible. And you could the number of races we did. I mean, you know, I don't know, you know, the Dan Martin victory in the 2013 tour where Robbie had developed a regression model on like exactly which stage we should just throw the entire team at, like attacking from the gun, and the regression model worked and Dan won. And it's like, whoa, like, but now, you know, regression modeling is, I mean, that's like grandma AI, right? Like it doesn't, I mean, it's irrelevant now. You know, but anyway, it'd be fun to find sort of like the next thing that no one has thought of and that everyone will dismiss. That's what I'm looking for.
So I kind of set you up for this question because that's where I want to go, is like where, without giving anything away, what area of science, psychology, or culture do you think is going to be the area that we can find our next breakthroughs in terms of moving the dice and rolling things forward?
Well, I think there's two areas that I would look at. One is actually, it goes back to the beginning of this conversation in really having a look at load manipulation, and not just like how to build fitness, but how to perfect it right into the event, right? I think that's an area that's underexplored, and that quite potentially AI would be very capable of sort of helping out with, right? So, you know, literally manipulating training load to exact a peak, as opposed to the main focus is manipulating training load to, you know, to slowly build up like power or fitness or endurance or whatever. But no one's looking at like how to like everyone's looking at how to fly the airplane, how to get the airplane off the ground and how to fly it. Nobody's looking at how to land the airplane, you know, just for that perfect little peak. So that's one area. The other is, you know, perfecting talent ID, right? You know, right now, talent ID is very archaic. The fact that UAE found Pogacar is like, okay, they're the biggest budget team in the world and blah, blah, blah. And like now they can afford to pay him and afford to pay 10 riders around him. But they found him at a time where they were not necessarily all of that, right? Like they were building, but they were not like the team when they found him. And how do they find him? Well, one of the directors, Andre Hauptmann, saw him at a junior race and was like, wow, this kid's really good and we should hire him. And actually then Giannetti said, okay, we'll give him a shot. Like, it was not like, there was not some sort of innate genius going on here, right? Like, and I would say that anyway, like the talent scouting or determining what riders will be able to adapt to world tour loads. Like, you can be a junior world champion, but can you adapt upwards with greater training load, with more race load, et cetera, et cetera? Some junior world champions, the answer is yes. Other junior world champions, the answer is no. And right now there is like no science I mean, there's only art. And how do you determine that? Because the biggest factor there is like, can you adapt to the load? Like Chris Froome, horrible junior, crappy U23 rider, but like had an incredible ability to adapt to high loads, right? Like, so he got 3% better every year. Like, he was shit at 22, but if you get 3% better every year, you're going to be pretty damn good by the time you're whatever, 30% better by the time you're 28. So, those type of, like, how do we determine that? I mean, honestly, it's probably some sort of genetic testing is what it is, but I don't know what the gene code is that unlocks that precisely. So, but to me, that's something that I would be super interested in. Like, how can we identify talent it's not the high VO2 max junior world champion talent. I want to know the talent that can actually has the high VO2 max and has all the big power figures, but that can also handle the load of a 3-week stage race. And right now there's just, you're just guessing, you're just shooting in the dark.
Mm.
So, a bit like that scene in Moneyball where Brad Pitt walks into the room with all of the old guys who are selectors, and they've got the photos of all the athletes, and they're sitting there, they're like, oh, he's got a good face for baseball. Yeah,
Yeah. That guy, well, he fights a lot with his girlfriend. We're not going to hire him.
Right. It's like,
which actually is good advice. Which actually is good.
So that was going to be my next sort of lead point is, personality type. You've seen them all, and you're also somebody I think who's got, maybe in some ways less, but in some ways a lot of EQ in about actually reading people and seeing how they work in environments. And, I definitely remember feeling like some years, especially when I was on the team, it really felt like a mixed bag of candy. Like, you put a very eclectic group of people together, but it always worked. So for you, how important do you find it is to actually get to know an athlete before you sign them, even if their numbers and all of these things are theoretically the best you can find?
It's important, but in this age of sort of warp speed racing and just in everything coming down to just raw horsepower, it's become a little less important, which is unfortunate. I think, in your era of racing, my era of racing, the races were more tactically complex, and teams had to be able to react to it like in real time and have people on the road that could make real decisions and actually trust the decisions of their teammates and whatnot. Racing is tactically less complex right now. It's been simplified by just pure power. And so I don't want to say, I want a bunch of guys that don't get along anymore, but I will say this, that like the days of, we all know this guy, right? The 32-year-old veteran rider that everyone loves around the dinner table. And the director's like, oh yeah, but we got to keep this guy because he's good around the dinner table. He's like, he keeps the group together. The days of that rider are numbered, because no matter how good you are around the dinner table, like if you're getting fired out the ass end of the race, it just doesn't matter anymore. And so I don't know. The answer to your question is I kind of miss the days that it took a lot of thought to figure out how can we put a group of guys together that actually is functional together. Because now it's just more like, how can we put a group of guys together that can just push into the pedals? Yeah.
The days of the road captain. Yeah.
I think the days of the road captain I don't know. It's not as useful as it used to be.
Yeah.
So
Interesting.
I don't know.
I've
That's
listened
the
to quote.
reality that we're facing. I mean, especially I don't know. Yeah. I think that is actually the reality of things in this day and age.
So, so if we care less about personalities, and we've got this like sport side of the team that's really important, the other side is the business side, what we're selling.
Mm.
We're obviously, this is a business where we're essentially mobile billboards, right? And
Yeah.
it's a competition to see whose billboard can get seen more than the other. If you win the Tour de France, your billboard gets seen a lot. If you don't, there's still other ways to see the billboard. So, are you saying that teams are now also taking those personality types into account, the ones that are very good with media and get a lot of exposure, outside of traditionally
Well,
winning, or is that also becoming less important?
no, I mean that's still important, but that's almost like that you're just in a totally separate category. I mean, Lachlan Morton being the best example of that, right? That like he's no longer racing World Tour races, still generates a lot of publicity, but it's almost what I've noticed is that your most important influencers in social media are oftentimes actually kind of weren't ever or will never be or aren't or whatever very good actual cyclists. Like, I mean, when you're at a Pogacar level, you could have a very boring Instagram feed and people will be there, but your riders that are sort of just like right underneath that are that they're not even necessarily at the World Tour level. They're people that are actually like entertaining just as bike riders. They're out like riding in the Swiss Alps. Like I think so. There's almost like two different categories there. In that one is that you're generating publicity through pure performance, and then the other is that you're generating it through just like interesting content, and it's actually irrelevant if you're even in the World Tour or not. So of course I want people that are well spoken, that are good representatives of the sponsor, that are good, that are good in the media, and that are good at producing their own content. Like of course, we look for that and we value that, but you know, that's again. I mean, it's just this is another aspect of the sport that is more difficult than it used to be because you've got only 2 or 3 riders that are winning sort of 80% of the races, or at least the races that really count, and then you've got very crowded space underneath that, and then you've got, like I said, these influencers that aren't even in the World Tour that are just sort of like explaining cycling to the masses that are doing well there. So where we fit is sort of like right underneath that, those like top 3 or 4 guys that win 80% of the races, and we have to find ways to pop through. Now, Ben Healy is an example of a way to pop through. Interesting personality, well spoken, people love the style in which he races. So here's an example of a guy who like pops through once in a while, like not consistently, but he pops through once in a while and creates interest because he's just the hard fighting guy that's always willing to attack, that has a funny looking little wiener dog. It's sort of, like last year's Tour de France was the perfect thing. It was like, the yellow jersey, that's great. And the attacking style and the stage win, that's great. And whatever else. And then you get the wiener dog on the rest day and boom, he's like in every media outlet around the world, and putting those things together is of course that's the game. I mean, that is my job, to be able to put those pieces together and find somebody that can like that. We're not racing Pogacar's race. That's literally a different race. Like any team that is trying to race that race is on the losing end of the equation. We're doing a totally different race and actually trying to create entertainment out of the race that we're racing, which has nothing to do with the Pogacar race. And that's the Moneyball aspect to it right now, is not finding like a sneaky way to win the Giro. It's finding a sneaky way to get the fans loving your team, doing something completely non sequitur and completely different than what any other team is doing. I mean, this last year's Tour de France, right? You had like Visma and UAE going at it for the GC, and then you had a couple of sprinters teams going at it for sprint stages, and and then other teams just sort of survived. And we were literally like this 4th category that we're not doing any of those things. We're not trying to win the race GC wise, and we're not trying to win sprint stages. We're just trying to get as many guys in breakaways as we can every single day, and then making sort of like a funny story about it. And it was like we were literally racing a different race than almost any other team was racing. And there are still gaps and seams in the fabric that you can poke through in cycling that still exist. There are fewer and fewer, and so you have to be more intelligent about them than you used to. But that's where we are right now. Is just trying to find like the part that everyone forgot to look at.
Strategy. Gotta have a strategy. I love it.
Yeah, gotta have a strategy. Yeah.
I mean, I see that as the archetype of the crazy old man dancing in the rain, right?
Yeah.
A little bit. Yeah. Yeah.
No, it's
I'm getting a low on battery, so just so you know.
No worries. Well, JB, I want to thank you for your time. It's been really interesting.
Yeah.
But I wanted to read one thing out before we actually sign off, because I just Googled it. Every time you properly shuffle a 52 deck card deck, the resulting order is almost certainly unique in human history. The number of possible arrangements is 52 factorial, which is roughly 8 times 10 to the power of 67, or an 8 followed by 67 zeros. This number is larger than the estimated number of atoms on Earth.
Wow.
There you go. Wow. So I learned something new. There you go.
So next time you're shuffling a deck of cards, know that might be your first and only ever original thought.
Yeah. Well, there you go. Well, that's actually encouraging. So hopefully we can shuffle the deck of cards in a way that no one thought of for this next year's Tour de France, or this year's Tour de France. Excuse me.
Yes.
Yeah,
and I mean, hopefully these aliens that are at the Giro right now can also teach us a new thing.
Yeah. I think that crew will pull something off in an unexpected way.
Exactly.
Shuffling deck.
Extraterrestrial way.
Yes.
Exactly. Extraterrestrial way. Yeah. That's been incredible, man. That jersey design. I think that's the. I mean, maybe the 2020, duck on the jersey was bigger, but like this one is a very close second as far as, public response. So it's good. Because everyone thought that like somehow Rafa was responsible for all of our creativity. I don't know why they thought that, but that seemed to be but now their design's going to go downhill because Rafa's out of the equation. It's like, well, I mean, come on, people, jeez, who do you think we are? Anyway.
Well, thank you very much, JB.
Yeah.
We always love listening to your opinions and thoughts on cycling. And again, just thanks for your time.
All right. Well, thank you for having me.
Yep. Thanks very much.
All right. See you guys.
Thank you for tuning in to the Cycling Performance Podcast. This podcast is produced by myself, Nathan Haas, and Colby Pierce, in association with EF Education and Team EF Coaching, a world leader in cycling coaching for all ages, abilities, and goals. Our world-class team of coaches have won over 100 national titles across all disciplines of cycling, competed in 47 Grand Tours with victories in all 3 and 6 Olympic Games. So it's our goal to distill our experiences to bring you the most cutting-edge approach to cycling to achieve your goals, dreams, and aspirations in our beautiful sport. If you'd like to learn more about Team EF Coaching, find us on Instagram, LinkedIn, or at our website, teamefcoaching.com. We would like to thank Peridur ap Gwyneth from Pendulum for the energetic theme music, and to Ross Hallard, our wonderful editor. Ride in flow, space monkeys.